you can come up with something that's a win in a different way, it gives you something, it gives you a story. And, as a sales leader, that's what I'm looking for. So if I'm looking for people across the org, I understand that performance varies and there are factors, and those factors are very real. But when I'm looking at my team, I look for people that are telling me, I understand I didn't make my number, but here's what I did about it. I went out and I sent 100 emails a day and I generated this much pipeline and I figured out a new play and I did this. And I know it hasn't paid off yet, but I'm going to keep hustling until it does. Those people I will always keep.
Is that what you would put in an A player category then?
Yeah. A player is not necessarily about outcomes. There are a lot of people in the world that have had incredible outcomes that are not A players.
I'll be honest, I still don't fully believe you, but hey, we'll take your word for it.
That's some royalty-free shit, people. That's what we do.
Beyond Quota.
Well, we're back. I'm Pouyan Salehi from Scratchpad. We've got Corp here with me as well. We have a very special Beyond Quota guest today. Professional gaming icon known as KillCreek, video game inventor, top performing sales legend, and now CRO at Vanta, a company I'm a big fan of. But more importantly, pulling it off as a badass single mom. So Stevie, welcome. We're excited to have you. And let's jump in.
We can start with something light. Like, how much is like Vanta reducing headcount? We don't. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I mean, I'm not kidding. We can answer
love
it,
that macroeconomic climate. It's fantastic out there. Isn't
macro
it?
econ killing us. Absolutely killing us.
Let's stay there for a minute, because I think there are a lot of folks that are finding themselves in the unfortunate situation of having been laid off. The company's not doing well. Stevie, you've been around the block. I mean, you've seen a lot. What advice would you have for folks there?
This is a moment to be thoughtful and be measured. And I am, really just grateful to be working with a team that is thinking through that strategy, thinking through responsible growth. But I think the advice is keep your head down, keep working. Like, the reality out there is massive market opportunity regardless of the macroeconomic climate. There are people that are killing it. We've got folks that are crushing quota, even given current macroeconomic climate. So I think it's all about keep your head down, keep hustling. Don't let it be an excuse. Just keep pushing.
As a CRO, like what are the conversations like at the top when you look at a macroeconomic situation like the one that we're in?
The conversation is extensive. It is, first of all, what do we expect to happen in the world? And the honest answer is nobody knows. But a lot of my work over the last 6 months has been talking to peers, talking to CROs, COOs, CFOs at other companies. And what are you seeing? What are you modeling? What are you expecting? Making sure we are aligned with what others are seeing in the market. And then question number 2 is strategically, where do we go from here? How does that strategy that we defined earlier in the year still match the economic climate? And I think there's a real mentality shift that has to happen. It's the shift we're challenging ourselves to. And I think a lot of boards are having this conversation with their companies. It's like, where do you get efficiency? How do you think about your strategy going forward in a world where climate's going to be tougher and people are thinking about how to save money? For us, one of the things we're really focused on right now is the shift up market. It's an important strategic shift for us. We've seen some great traction in the mid-market and the enterprise, and we're doubling down there because in tougher climates, those are companies that are stable. They still need to save money. They still need to address compliance. These are all great things that matter to them. So I think it's about connecting your strategy to efficiency metrics as opposed to just growth metrics. And you got to change the whole way you're thinking about your business. It can't be growth at all costs anymore. You really got to think about how the math works on the back end of that equation.
What keeps you up at night? What are you worried about as CRO of a fast growing company?
The biggest thing that keeps me up at night is that how do I see the future? how do I see it accurately enough to make good decisions today? You've got to look so many more steps ahead than in just like a sales leadership role. And I'm so grateful to have had the journey I had at Twilio. In my career, I've gone back and forth between being an IC salesperson, carrying a quota, carrying a bag, being a sales leader, and now first time as a CRO. And a lot of the difference at each of those levels is how far ahead you have to look. So in the CRO seat, I need to be looking 12, 24 months out, 5 years out. Where are we trying to head as a company? And there's always this temptation to go back to that salesperson's mindset of, well, let's just win today. Let's beat today's number, this quarter's number. And as long as we're doing that, we're good. Thing that keeps me up is, are we going to make next year's number? And are we going to hit our strategy 3 years out, 5 years out?
What else? Like, I'm curious, what's it been like in the CRO seat first time? What else are you learning?
I think the biggest difference between being a sales leader and being a CRO is the metrics you look at and the way you think about the math of the business. You need that math to work in a very different way. So it's not just about growth and quota and net new revenue. You've got to have a much broader view. And the thing that becomes really important is understanding other benchmarks in the industry. How do you stack up against other companies at this stage, at this point in their growth? So, honestly goes back to a lot of my gamer past. Starting out as a gamer, it's really resource management. It's making sure you're aligning things. So when you get to the end of the game, you're actually set up to win.
I want to jump into gaming, but I want to hear real quick, like you mentioned other metrics, like what other metrics?
There's the obvious top line metrics, right? So we're of course thinking about all of the basics of net new revenue, expansion, churn. For us, it's been a transition from thinking about gross retention to thinking about net retention. So we're making a shift right now to have much more emphasis there as we become a multi-product company. So, now I'm looking at the next level down, particularly in the current macroeconomic climate. I'm looking at sales efficiency. I am looking at how much I can get out of each individual person on the team. What size book of business can a CSM manage? And then we're starting to look at that in the context of bigger numbers for the business.
You brought up the gaming. Let's go there, because my understanding is you were studying to be a lawyer, and somehow you dropped out to play video games.
I started playing, living in the dorms. I was on this honors floor of a dorm at the University of Kansas girl. And we started playing Doom, and then Quake came out. And when Quake came out, a lot of that cohort, they all moved into this house, and we were just having LAN parties in that house constantly. So it was 24/7 LAN parties. And we even had friends traveling from all over the US. There's no social media yet. So we're literally communicating with these folks on IRC. This was like ICQ, IRC, early days of the internet. And they'd travel on out to our house, then bring their 21-inch CRT monitors that weighed like 1,000 pounds and like hook up some Ethernet cables. But that is why I am here. That early experience, like I learned to build a PC bit by bit in that house. Like I learned the basics of how software gets made in that house. It radically changed my life. And I'm such a believer in gaming for that reason.
God, Sam built this guy right here to my right. I'm all about this. I want to hear the origin of your gamer tag.
Oh,
KillCreek.
yes. KillCreek.
I would love to get that story.
So KillCreek, early days, I had no idea I was going to be stuck with this name for my whole life, basically. But so
it's been way worse and way less badass. Like when you think about the names that I've come up with on these games.
Yeah, well, something that sounds dangerous. Yeah. So KillCreek is actually a real creek that I grew up near, and it was also my favorite band in college. And the funny thing was I ended up being friends with the band, like great guys, ended up being lifelong friends with the lead singer. And he always thought it was rather hilarious that they had made a real go at being a big famous band signed to a label, and that I was featured in Rolling Stone before their band was.
Right.
This does not seem right. This is not how it was supposed to be.
You would have gotten the verified check mark on social media, and they wouldn't have.
Yes, and I would have felt really bad about it.
So you've watched King of Kong, I'm sure, at some point. Of course.
Yes.
Of course. So this whole like story, it's not quite the same, but it's very similar where you challenged the inventor of Quake to a death match. And my understanding is you lost game 1 and then won 2 and 3 to take the series.
That's correct. In fact, we had a little bit more of an informal challenge earlier on where I happened to be down visiting their office. They were down in Dallas, which was like the epicenter of shooters at that point. And the first time we played casually, he beat me and he bragged about it and was very aggressively loud about that victory. So
A
that's when
video
the
game nerd being a dick? What do you mean?
never, right?
What
Never.
do you mean?
It's shocking. And yeah, I threw down the gauntlet after that and I came back down and it was a best of 3 and he won the first one and something snapped in me and the competitor came out. I was not going to let that happen.
Right. So you did what anyone would do. You dominated him and then you dated him and dominated him again and then dumped his ass in the most savage power move in the history of the world.
I'm not going to deny that. That is accurate.
What was it like being a woman in the gaming scene then?
I mean, it's hard to even explain now because it seems like such a caricature. It is worlds away from how it is in mainstream tech now. It was there were so few of us, and you got to keep in mind we were playing at these LAN parties, and when we were playing multiplayer online, generally you were going into the console of a game and like typing in the IP address of a server. So there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was no TikTok. Like it was just IRC. It was very text heavy. So one of the things that made it unique is that you couldn't see anyone. So for a long time, I didn't know that I was one of the only women. And it was only through this like course of revelation and starting to go out to live in-person events and talking to people that I realized, like, wait, where is everybody? There are no women. And, there were things about that were really unique and door opening. And I think it was very polarizing. People either had a very positive, like, oh, isn't this exciting? There's actually a woman who is into gaming, who's into what we're into. And some folks had a very positive reaction to that. And some folks had a very negative reaction to that.
There's a lot of parallels in playing video games and being one of the few women in the room to jumping to sales.
Yes.
Yes. So can you talk about that transition? I know you spent some time kind of in the video game industry doing some things, but then like, how did you find yourself into enterprise sales?
It is. So I got into making games and then I was a product manager, a producer of games. And that was my introduction to building software. So I was on, the production teams creating software, and it happened that software was games. And that took me to LA. So I ended up in LA and I was working for Warner Brothers. And at Warner Brothers, I was making mobile games. And this was like early days of not even smartphones. There was no iPhone yet, just feature phones. And we were making games with all of their IP. And I had this vendor, and this guy had technology platform that I was using as his customer at Warner Brothers to port that software to thousands of different phone models, which you used to have to do. And, he and I had hit it off. I had bought his software, and he came to me one day and he said, I need a junior salesperson, and I think I could teach you to sell. What do you think? And my honest internal reaction was, I have no idea what that involves or what it means. I was very shy and socially awkward, and I thought it sounds incredibly uncomfortable, and I love a challenge, so absolutely I need to do this. This is clearly something that will help change my life, and either way, no matter if I pursue it long-term or short-term, it'll make me better, and I'll learn something. And I ended up taking the gig, and that guy's now a VC. He's got his own firm, and he took me on the road and just like beat me into submission and taught me how to sell.
So interesting. You leaned into that. When I think a lot of folks would be like, whoa, something new, something scary. No, I'm going to stay here. And Do you know other folks that went from gaming to sales?
Was it not a bad word to you when you brought it up? Or you're not like, ooh, that sounds gross or
I,
not
maybe
quite?
a little bit, a little bit. It felt more than gross. It was just uncomfortable. Like I knew it was something that was not in my bones and something I had no idea how to even approach. I had nobody in my family has ever done sales. I had no background. But I do think there's something to that idea of leaning into that discomfort and the challenge. That is the one common thread in my life is when I am presented with opportunity, I lean into it, even if it's deeply uncomfortable. And in fact, the more deeply uncomfortable it is, the more likely I am to lean into it because there's growth in that challenge. And the truth is, it's like you get into this stuff. And yeah, there are people who obviously built whole careers to end up here. But my mentor, George who is a COO at Salesforce, he was such a great role model for me. He started as an intern at Salesforce. And I remember having a conversation with him at one point. He worked his way up over more than a decade there to be the CMO and then the COO. And just hearing his story about taking that job for the first time and I asked him, how do you even know what to do? CMO at Salesforce was his first marketing job ever. Like, how do you even know what to do when you sit down? And he said, the truth is, most people don't know when they take a job, especially at the executive level. You may not have the domain expertise. And you really just lean into making it clear what you want people to work on, give them clear priorities, and learn and iterate. And that's all you can do. And I've tried to roll with that mentality and, that discomfort to me is growth. That's challenge. It's like if you don't put yourself on the line, you don't get those kind of opportunities.
Let's go to Twilio for a second, because my understanding is you had a little bit of a fun run there,
I did.
right? Like going
I
from IC to running a massive team in just a few years, but also like top performing IC. And there are a lot of folks there. So yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, it was a blast, and I am so grateful. When I initially joined Twilio, so I was the last hire before the IPO. I joined the week before the IPO, and at that point, there was very little sales. And it was really sales in name only. It was mostly like a team that was doing customer success and enablement. And there was no quarterly cadence. There was no concept of a committed contract. Like it was just this usage-based self-service machine running at a $200 million ARR run rate. And I was really fired up about joining. I had a friend in engineering. So I may be the only sales leader to ever be referred by like a senior director of Eng. So it came in that way. I think that gave me a little more credibility. And at that point, I was coming from running everything customer facing at an earlier stage, Series A startup. And they offered me a couple of options. And they said, well, you can either take a role that's more of a management role, running sort of a partnerships team that's more senior, or we've got an IC role. We've never done enterprise sales. You can be one of our first enterprise salespeople and just crush a quota. I was like, hell yes.
Just crush a quota.
Let's
come in here
do
just like, I'm not like crush a quota.
Let's crush some quota. Like, let's make $1 million. Let's be our first seller, make $1 million, And that's what I decided to go do. And it was unbelievable. My territory when I joined Twilio was every company over 1,000 employees west of the Mississippi River.
So why'd we leave? we were too comfortable. We were
Yeah.
happy, and we needed to hurt again. Yeah.
We've established I like to lean into discomfort. So, 6 years, I was there 6 years. And I think that as somebody who likes disruption and likes challenge and learning, I hit that point of thinking I need to lift my head up and at least look around at what's going on in the market, because you get to that point where companies might start to look at you and go, oh, you're a lifer. Like, what do you know? You've been at one company for too long.
So are you love to win or hate to lose person?
I'm love to win. I think, my instinct was to say both, but deep, deep, deep down, I'm love to win. I've really made a transition in my life. I'm not motivated by fear anymore. I'm now motivated by just the joy and like that experience of the win and of growing. And like, startup life is hard. It's like lots of ups and downs and challenges and market changes, the macro, everything that's going on. But that experience of winning as a team, like that's legit. So for people that are like cynical about sales, I see why they feel that way, but I don't know, there's so much joy in that team win.
Do you think it's possible to turn B players into A players, or do you have to find A players?
I would say 98% of the time, no. There
What
will
about
be
B to A?
outliers. And at the bottom of that, somebody's got to have a growth mindset. There have got to be artificial factors that make them a C player, things that have held them back, or lack of exposure is a big one. If somebody just is a C player because they've got lack of exposure to what success looks like, that's fixable. And I put myself in that camp. Like I would not be doing what I'm doing if I didn't have these mentors give me the exposure along the way. Like when I started out in that first job, I don't even, C player would be generous. Like I was bad. I was really, really bad. And I had some people who taught me. So I do think people can learn and be taught. They need to have the curiosity and the hunger to learn. And if you do that, you can ascend.
There's nothing that solves all issues like winning. And when everybody's kind of losing and there's just like universal loss right now, so many people are they're just down, rightfully so. But like, how would you rationalize that as someone who's just like not lucky to be at a Vanta, right? Where the product is crushing it and it's just like things feel all good.
There are still ways to find wins. And, even if you have bad luck and you've got bad territory and you're struggling in a market, you're not getting enough leads, whatever it may be, you got to look then for what is the secondary thing that you can win on. It's like, okay, I'm going to do everything I can do to make my quota, but if I can't do that, what's a win? Maybe it's a competitive takeout, a deal I can win that is a great takeaway from another competitor. Maybe it's a win in a specific vertical. Maybe I can establish an outbound motion that didn't exist before. Maybe I can generate more pipeline than anybody else. Like there are things that every person can control. And if you can come up with something that's a win in a different way, it gives you something, it gives you a story. And, as a sales leader, that's what I'm looking for. So if I'm looking for people across the org, I understand that performance varies and there are factors, and those factors are very real. But when I'm looking at my team, I look for people that are telling me, I understand I didn't make my number, but here's what I did about it. I went out and I sent 100 emails a day and I generated this much pipeline and I figured out a new play and I did this. And I know it hasn't paid off yet, but I'm going to keep hustling until it does. Those people I will always keep.
Is that what you would put in an A player category then?
Yeah. A player is not necessarily about outcomes. There are a lot of people in the world that have had incredible outcomes that are not A players.
You're a single mom, and I can't even raise a succulent or an orchid. Orchids are apparently pretty hard, so I don't feel that bad. Or a cactus, which isn't that hard, but I've really struggled in that they're all dead. So can you, what is like the advice you have out there? I think there's a lot of folks out there in the world, single parents who are like, how do I make a career? How do I become like, how do I raise a human and also become a CRO?
It is hard. I will definitely be honest about that. However, I think that at the heart of that is the reality that it's very possible and that you don't need to apologize for having obligations or being a human or not being 100% work all the time, because nobody is the truth. Everybody's got other stuff in their lives. And the more you can just embrace that and be honest about it and roll with who you really are as a person, that path is very much open to you. There are other incredible parents, moms, other CROs. One of my very best friends, Somia Srinigesh, who is the CRO at Deliver, who just got bought by Shopify. She's amazing. She had a baby 5 months after taking the CRO role. She's crushing it. And, they just got acquired. Leandra Fishman is a mom over at Intercom, CRO. Like these people are out there. And we may be a little bit more of the exception, but I think that's less the case every single year. And I think it's about just really embracing that reality, and whoever you are, just own it.
Stevie, I think you said something interesting in one of the interviews, and how having, like, being a single mom or having a child actually influence you to lean in more, take more risks, when most folks would consider saying, oh, I need to be maybe more cautious and provide, and I can't maybe take a risk on that job. So that I found that really inspiring.
Well, I think at the heart of that is part of why I like sales, and it's that leaning into discomfort. And for the first half of my career in sales, it did come from a place of fear. It was, I have got to drive for it. I've got to crush my quota. I have got to do a great job at this because I need to provide for her. And, those early days with her, I've been a single mom with full custody of her since she was 3. And right around the time she was 4, so rough. I was in a sales role. We were nearly evicted. I was babysitting for extra cash on the weekends because the only job I could do and bring her with me. And then I was like showing up on Monday to my sales job, ready to crush it. And it was coming from a place of sheer terror about whether or not I could actually deliver and do the job and bring home enough money to support her and do what I needed to do. Now, I've been very fortunate in the middle of that run to have had some great outcomes, some acquisitions, and really grateful to be where I am today. So it now comes from a place of, like, I want to show her what success looks like. I want her to see what it looks like to achieve. And there's no reason I can't do it. And I think that message of why not me is something that anybody earlier in career, there are no rules. There's no super secret magical club that you have to be a part of to get into, like a head of sales or a CRO role. It's just hustle and learning and challenging yourself.
Thanks so much for joining us. And I don't know, Ben, are we doing any sort of wrap up? I know Ross asked a bunch of questions at the end.
Yeah, usually Ross and I will ask the love to win, hate to lose question. And usually the most competitive people will say hate to lose. But now I don't know what to think anymore. Now
Yeah, that was the first time
No.
I've ever considered love to win.
You said it with
Yeah.
so much conviction, and just like you're like, it's almost like you have transcended above the hate to lose.
It's
to
so
this- to
true.
this space.
God damn, I hate losing.
by the way,
I was a hate to lose person. That's where that first 10 years is it's scarcity mindset. That's the thing. You got to transcend all the way to love to win.
sorry, if you see me wrangling with something here,
There you go.
it's my 4-year-old. She's just
It's a creature. It's a creature.
When she punches it, it's like at that right height, and it hurts. So that's why I'm very cautious around her.
Hello.
Okay. Do you love to win, or do you hate to lose?
Both.
Win.
Yes.
Okay. There we go.
She's
Yes.
transcended.
Transcended.
She's already there. Starting early.
Beyond